Hello from Bath in the southwest of England. I'm j.f.penn and I write thrillers as j.f.penn. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the number one question that I get asked and all authors get asked, which is, where do you get your ideas from? So there are a number of ways I get ideas, but probably my number one is traveling. And I wanted to record this video because as I record it in mid-May 2020, I'm in lockdown, and Bath is a lovely place to be locked down, but still I can't travel. So in this video, I'll be talking a bit about how I usually travel. So first of all, I decide on a place, and it might be because I want to write a book about it, or because it's a place I want to go and I know I'm going to find ideas there. So on a recent trip, in fact, the last time we were able to travel, we went to San Sebastian and Bilbao in northern Spain. And so I bought guidebooks. Now, I always buy Lonely Planet guidebooks. I've been using them for many years, like 30 years or something. So always good to have a Lonely Planet. And then I also quite like the Wallpaper City Guides and other kind of slightly more quirky guidebooks for other things, especially cultural places. I'll also go to the Atlas Obscura website and search where I'm going because they have loads of really interesting and unusual places. They also have some great books, which this is the second edition. I also have the first edition because I really love their work. And a lot of people submit their interesting places to Atlas Obscura. So always a good place to go if you're visiting because those places are often not in the guidebooks. Once I've decided on the places that I need to visit in said location, I will make an itinerary. And the reason this is important is because many places are not open every day. In Europe, for example, museums and art galleries like the Guggenheim here in Bilbao are not open on a Monday. And in fact, when we went to San Sebastian and Bilbao, I had to rearrange the trip because of getting there on a Monday and not being able to go to the gallery. So that is really important. You don't want to be somewhere for a short amount of time and not be able to visit the place you want to visit. And if you're going at high season, it's always good to book tickets for museums, art galleries, anything you want to go to in advance. When it's peak travel season in some of these places, it can be really hard to get into various museums. So I always like to buy my tickets online before I go to avoid any queues. So if you're wondering, this is the exterior of the Guggenheim in Bilbao. It is a gorgeous building if you like architecture like I do, and this is the Maman sculpture by Louise Bourgeois, which I had seen like 20 years ago at the Tate Modern back in the day, and now there are copies around the world, but this is one of them, and the museum is incredible. If you get to go look at it in different light, there's also a fog kind of exhibit that comes out. It's just a beautiful place. But then when I get to a place, and my husband Jonathan is often with me, we don't necessarily follow the itinerary, sort of every step of the way. We might visit a museum and then see what else comes up. And what's interesting is I'm always open to serendipity, and some of the places I thought would really inspire me end up not being the place that inspire me. One example is Amsterdam. So this is me in the Ouderkerk in the old city of Amsterdam, and I really thought that it would inspire me with a story. And it's a great church. It's right in the red light district, and is an interesting church, but I just felt nothing there. And I love going to churches. I always go to churches, cathedrals, places of worship, synagogues, and I'm looking for story, and I take pictures and I see what's going on, but this one didn't do anything for me. And we went to lots of places in Amsterdam, but the place where I got an idea, the seed of the idea which will become Arcane Book 11, Tree of Life, is the Etzheim Synagogue and the library, and Etzheim is Tree of Life. And I had no idea there were so many Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam after they were thrown out of Spain and thrown out of Portugal back in the 15th century. And so I was surprised by what we found at Etzheim, and that was the place that turned out to have the kernel of a story. I also get a lot of ideas from non-fiction books, and I always pick up books when I'm traveling because you can often find books that you just didn't stumble upon online or in a book bookstore. So this is one I found in the Etzheim Libraries bookstore, which is a great bookstore. It's called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. And when I saw this book, I was like, whoa, I did not have any clue about this. This is a non-fiction book. This is not a joke. And it's full of incredible research about some of the Jews who left Portugal and also Amsterdam and sort of took over the Caribbean, or not took it over, but, you know, had a base there. And it's a really interesting book. So that will also go into my research for Tree of Life. So it's really about following the curiosity. If something catches my eye and I think, well, that's interesting, then I assume that my readers are also going to find it interesting. So in this case, I bought the book. I bought some other books about Etzheim. So I have that for my research and my writing later. And I should say, I haven't, as I'm recording this in May 2020, I haven't started writing Tree of Life. I'm just thinking about ideas. We went to Amsterdam over a year ago. I knew I was going to put it in a book, didn't really know what it would turn into. So it's more like I go places and collect ideas and then they come out later in book form. But once we went to Amsterdam and found the Portuguese synagogue, I said to Jonathan, I think we should go to Portugal. So we went to Lisbon later in the year. This is me by the Henry the Navigator monument, because the Portuguese Empire is fascinating. There are so many things that have kind of disappeared into history. Portugal is not a massive empire now, but it sure was. So this is interesting to me. I love ancient empires. So that will be the kernel of the book too. My thriller Valley of Dry Bones is another example that sort of the research spanned over a couple of years. So I was in New Orleans writing another book, and I was in the St. Louis Church Cathedral there in Jackson Square, and I find very old cathedrals fascinating, but so obviously some of the ones in America are not as old as the ones here in Europe. But I was at the back of the church and I turned around and there was this glass case with the Toledo Bible in it. And when I went closer, I was like, Toledo, that's in Spain. What's that doing here? And of course, I learned a bit about the Spanish history of New Orleans, but it's much more well known for the French Quarter, and I was in the French Quarter. But there was this Toledo Bible, this lovely illustrated copy of the original, which was in Toledo in Spain. And I thought, there's definitely a story here. This is fascinating. And then I went next door to the Cabildo, and in that place I found this painting. And this is Father Antonio de Sedella, known as Père Antoine. And he was the supreme officer of the Holy Inquisition of Cartagena in Louisiana. And that is just so cool. He also happened to know Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen. And thus the link between voodoo and Catholicism and the Inquisition was born for the story of Valley of Dry Bones. This then led me to Toledo. And this is Toledo. If you go to Madrid in Spain, it's a really short train ride from Madrid. It's an incredible city. This is a view from the hill overlooking the city. I absolutely recommend the bus tour. If you go, you get this view across, and it's a stunning place. And the cathedral there is just huge. But essentially I found the original Bible there. It just in a little corner, nothing too crazy. And we also visited the synagogue, which is a really old synagogue, and that is where I found some more of the story that went into Valley of Dry Bones. But the synchronicity doesn't end there. And this is what I love about being a thriller writer. If you look for story, you will find it, or it finds you perhaps. But I had been in San Francisco like a year before, or something like that. It was a while back when I was in San Francisco. This is me at Alcatraz. And if you read Valley of Dry Bones, you will know that Alcatraz is an important part of the story. But I visited Alcatraz, and the challenge with many of these places is, how do you write something that someone hasn't written before? Because, of course, there are so many books written about many of these places, and that's part of the fun and the challenge. But I went to San Francisco. I visited Mission Dolores and looked at the links with the Spanish there, and came across this friar, Junipero Serra, and I was like, okay, there was this tiny relic in the church, and I was like, not really enough to hang a story on. But then we went to Mallorca in which is in the Balearics. It's an island, a Spanish island in the Balearics, and we went into Palma Cathedral. This is it. By the way, if you go, Palma is best known for sort of beach resorts, but the old medieval city is fantastic. Really narrow streets, so when the Templars were there, people couldn't invade so easily. But this is a gorgeous cathedral, and that is the baldachin above the altar. And this is made by Gaudi. And Gaudi, of course, Spanish architect, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, which I had in my book Gates of Hell, is just brilliant. And I was just stunned to walk in and see this beautiful church. So we were walking around the old city, and we were heading back to the hotel and went round the corner and saw this. And this is the Franciscan monastery where Junipero Serrat, first of all, he was born on Mallorca, and then this is him with the natives, which is terrible. And of course, there's much controversy over what the Spanish did to the indigenous people of Mexico and the United States. But history being history, this is what happened. And he travelled from Mallorca to Mexico, I think it was, and then went up and founded the missions up the west coast of the USA. And so I found this and I was like, okay, wow, I have to write about this guy. I can now see the link to Spain. I hadn't even kind of realised his links. So this went in the book too. So that one is quite a complicated version of what happened when I was researching and writing Valley of Dry Bones. And sometimes this is why my books take a while to write, because I am looking for story, and then what's interesting is how things hang together. Because my aim, especially with my arcane thrillers, is to write a story that could be true and then twist it slightly into thriller and fiction. So a lot of it is true, and in my author's notes I always write where things came from and where I visited and books and interesting things that you might find useful. But a simpler example is when we moved to Bath in the southwest of England a few years back, and this shop was round the corner from our flat where we first rented. It's Jonathan Potter's Antique Map Shop, and I loved walking past this shop. You can just see there the globe and some pictures in the windows. He had these very expensive, many of them, many thousands of pounds to get one of these maps. And I would walk past pretty much every day. I would walk past this shop and I would look in the window, and eventually I went in, I bought his book on maps and, had a bit of a chat. And then only about a year later, he retired, and that is no longer a map shop in Bath. It was in a street called Margaret Buildings. It's not there anymore. And what was so crazy is that actually sparked the idea for the whole Map Walker series. And the premise is essentially, what if you could walk through maps? You didn't have to get on a plane. And in fact, right now, as I record this in the time of coronavirus, it would be great if we could just walk through maps, and there was some kind of virus protector as well, I guess. But that shop spawned the whole series, because I just thought, well, this was quite an old guy, and then he retired. As I said, the shop isn't there anymore. And I thought, well, what if his granddaughter inherited the shop under dastardly circumstances, and what would happen if she discovered this ability to walk through maps? And that's how the books were born. And there's lots of other things in those books, but I just wanted to give some sort of examples of how I find ideas. I also get a lot of ideas from museums. This is one of my perennial favourites, the British Museum in London. If you are in London, please visit the British Museum. It is a cornucopia of incredible things, and it's featured in a number of my books. One of the exhibitions was on religious relics years ago now, and that was the foundation of Crypt of Bone. I also visited the Sunken Egypt exhibition and wrote this short story, The Dark Queen, which was sparked by a sculpture of a goddess that they pulled up from the depths. And then, of course, Day of the Vikings is actually set during an exhibition at the British Museum, which I also attended, on Vikings. And there was this curled up sword, which fascinated me, and a huge replica. Well, I don't know, it wasn't a replica, it was an actual boat. The actual Viking boat was there. And I thought, what if a group of neo-Vikings stormed the British Museum to find one of these objects? And that's the basis of Day of the Vikings, which you can actually get for free at j.f.penn.com/free. And that book was again inspired by an exhibition. And Desecration, my London crime thriller trilogy, the researcher Blake Daniel works at the British Museum. And I've always thought that if I wasn't a writer, perhaps I would have been in another life an archaeologist or an archivist or a museum researcher or something like that. And of course, I do put a lot of myself into my books. So you can see many more of my pictures. I take a lot of pictures. I kind of live with my iPhone in my hand when I do my walks around and my research trips. But you can see all my photos and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at j.f.penn author. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions or thoughts or comments about me doing videos, because I want to do more of them, please do leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed this and you like podcasts, I have a podcast about travel where I interview people about the travels behind their books and also talk about much more around my own travels. Check out Books and Travel on your favourite podcast app or at booksandtravel.page. And as I mentioned, if you want to try a free thriller, you can get Day of the Vikings at j.f.penn.com/free. So happy reading until next time.